Hey, everybody. Welcome, 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 welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. We're going to have a great discussion, just like we did last night, just like we did the night before last. It's going to be good. So, welcome, everybody. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are going to have a great conversation tonight. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Welcome, 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 everybody. So glad to have you.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you all here. So it's going to be good. The way this generally works is I give my opening remarks, and my opening remarks are followed by the roll call. And then after that, I just answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, just shoot me a super chat, and I will be writing those super chats down. And then from there, I'll be answering them in the second half of the show. That's the idea. So it should be a lot of fun tonight. Be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. It's gonna be awesome. Gonna be awesome, folks. Good times, good times. I guess just a quick reminder that we are having a Center for Political Innovation conference on August 6th. In Chicago area at the Deerfield Hyatt Plaza Hotel. Try to be there. It's gonna be awesome. Oh, Gleb is admiring my work taking down Jordan Peterson. Thank you, Gleb. That video is getting a good amount of views, so thank you very much. And August 6th, Hyatt Plaza Hotel in Deerfield, Illinois. It's in the Chicago area. Be there, please. We'd love to have you there. If you'd like to make a donation to help that conference happen, you can shoot us a donation at CPI Events on Cash App. That would be where you can send a donation to make sure that event goes smoothly. Just in the process of booking the security, we're going to have security there to make sure everyone's safe. Nice hotel. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be really awesome. I'm very, very, very excited about it. So I just wanted to let everyone know about that. The Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. We are an anti-imperialist think tank, socialists, patriots. We want to make a better country by breaking the United States out of the system of global monopoly capitalism, where the rich and powerful put money ahead of everything else. We need a government of action that will fight for working families, a government of action that will fight for working families. That's what we need. Stand up to the war makers and the bankers and the profiteers, the big corporations, the international monopolies, the big, ultra-wealthy, billionaire elite that control the United States. Fight for the working class. Build a better future. That's what we are all about at the Center for Political Innovation, and we'd love to have you involved. So if you want to join, it'd be great. Our website is cpiusa.org. It's great. I'm back in New York. I'm going to be headed to Chicago again pretty soon for our conference, but I'm back in New York this week. Been enjoying the lovely scenes, but I wanted to talk about something. That I've been meaning to bring up again for a while, because on here we talk about the capitalist class, those who own the means of production, those who own the banks, factories, and industries, and the centers of economic power, the owning class, and we talk about the working class, the proletariat, those who have nothing to sell but their labor, and they can only sell their labor when it makes profits for a capitalist. They must sell themselves piecemeal like any other commodity. The proletariat, the working class. We talk about them. And we talk about the bourgeoisie, the owning class. And then we also talk about the imperialists, because not all capitalists are imperialists. right? Most capitalists, they own one little business here or one little chain here or something, but the world is not ruled by just plain capitalists. It's ruled by imperialists, the ultra monopolies that dominate the world and make super profits by controlling the markets around the world, keeping entire nations subjugated under them. The export of capital, as Lenin calls it, in Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, where we don't export French fries, we export McDonald's, where the corporations based in the Western countries dominate the world, keeping countries poor in order to make themselves rich. They don't simply make profits, they make super profits. And as a result of that, it's not just the workers around the world that are exploited, but it's entire nations, the workers of Africa, the workers of Asia, the workers of Latin America. They aren't simply exploited, they are super exploited because their entire country has been kept in crippling poverty by the economic domination of the ultra monopolists, the imperialists. This is capitalism in its monopoly stage. The rule of finance capital, the export of capital, the rule of the world by trusts, cartels, and syndicates. Lenin called it imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And this is important to talk about because there are a lot of folks who these days are talking about globalism. You hear that a lot from the right wing, from Trump supporters. They talk about the globalists. And who are the globalists? Right? Well, we would say the globalists are the World Economic Forum. They're the International Monetary Fund. They're the World Bank. They are the World Trade Organization. They are the Silicon Valley elite, the Silicon Valley fascists, the big four super major oil companies, the six families that dominate the United States, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the Mellons, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, right? These old money elites that dominate the United States, that dominate the world. We talk about all these things. And when we talk about these things, sometimes it's important to get into a little bit of history. And there's one particular phenomena in the ancient world that I've discussed here before, and I'm going to talk about it again because it is particularly relevant in understanding the way the world is currently and understanding how we got from here to there. We do know that the Mediterranean Ocean, that was at one point in the history of humanity, that was the center of the known world. That it was on the Mediterranean that you had Greece and the Greek city-states, Athens, Sparta. It's where you had Egypt and the Egyptian civilization. It's where you had the Persians, the Persian Empire, and the Persian civilizations. And it's eventually where you had Rome in Italy, right? You had the Roman civilization. And the Mediterranean Sea at one point where Europe and the Asian Minor and Asia and Africa come together. That particular pocket, that ocean pocket, the Mediterranean, Syria, Damascus, Jerusalem, Al-Quds, Palestine, Alexandria, Tunisia, North Africa, Libya, that area, the Mediterranean, that was at one point the center of the known world. And there was a period where what they call classical civilization, Greece and Rome, was centered around the Mediterranean Sea. And that was the beginning of what we might call globalism. Because along the Mediterranean Ocean, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Europe, this was Southern Europe, there were city-states. Those were cities, the first cities that we saw. Carthage, in what is now Tunisia, Alexandria, Damascus, Jerusalem. That these city-states that became empires. These city-states were one of the the places where human civilization started to flourish. We know that human civilization started in Africa, right? Before the Fertile Crescent, before Mesopotamia, you had Timbuktu. You had Timbuktu in Africa. We know about the great city-states that existed. We know about the Egyptian civilization. We know about Babylon. We know about Persia and the Persian Empire. And it was the Greek city-states that were on the ocean, on the Mediterranean Sea. We started to see the beginnings of civilization. In Athens, you have Socrates and Plato, talk of democracy. So when we talk about the beginning of civilization, there's an institution that often gets overlooked when people are talking about the history of civilization. And that institution is the oracle at Delphi, or the temple at Delphi. And people refer to it. If you read anything about the ancient world, there's going to generally be some vague reference to the temple at Delphi. But if you want to understand our modern world, and you want to understand empires and how they work, and if you want to understand global elites, imperialists, Atlanticists, you want to understand the British Empire, you want to understand how the Roman Empire came into existence, you want to understand the way the elites who run the United States in this very hour, the way that they think, if you want to understand the mindset of those who seek to rule over the rest of humanity, you need to go back to the temple at Delphi. Now, it doesn't sound any logical. It's like, Caleb, you're talking about something thousands and thousands of years ago. Well, I'm going to pull up. This is the temple at Delphi. That is the temple at Delphi. That's what it looked like. It's now in ruins. But it's a small island in the center of the Mediterranean Sea. The temple at Delphi was the center of the known world at the time. And it was this small island at the center of the world, the center of the Mediterranean Ocean. And that was believed to be a very sacred location where people could get access to divine authority. And a temple was built on the island of Delphi. And there was a priesthood, a group of priests who worked at the temple of Delphi, the Delphic order or the Delphic priesthood. They worked at this temple. And Delphi was not the property of any of the city-states. It was independent. It was not owned by Athens. It was not owned by Sparta. It was not owned by Rome. It was not owned by anybody. It was an independent island. And at the temple at Delphi, they inscribed on the walls, on the inscription reads, "Know thyself." That's very important, and a very important phrase. Know thyself. Know thyself was inscribed on the walls of the temple. And at the temple, you had the priesthood at Delphi. And the priesthood was a group of men who spoke many different languages, probably some of the most the most well-educated people of the ancient world. And the priesthood at Delphi, they oversaw the oracle, or the Pythia. And what was the oracle? What was the oracle, or the Pythia? Well, this is what the oracle was. I'm going to pull it up here on the screen. All right. This is the oracle. The oracle, or the Pythia at Delphi. It's a woman. And it was believed, and it was various women. I mean, this went on for thousands of years. For thousands of years, there was various women that they had at the temple. And these women were believed to have the ability to predict the future. And so they had a whole elaborate ritual they would do. These ancient kings would come to Delphi, the island of Delphi. They would have to take off all their clothes and bathe and clean themselves so they were spiritually clean. and they would bang gongs, and they would play music and chant and do all kinds of stuff. And then finally, they would take these kings. They would take these kings to see the Pythia, or the oracle, and it would be a woman. And the woman would be seated, as you can see, she would be seated on a throne, and she would be have been given drugs. She'd be, breathing in fumes from volcanic, smoke or whatever, and they would get her into some alternate state of mind, and she would begin to blather. The woman that they would have there, the Pythia, the oracle, would start to go. She would just speak incoherently. She would just blather. Nonsense. And then the priests at the temple would say to the kings, what she's saying is, and they would give some kind of prophetic prediction. Very interesting. Now, we know this was bullshit. She was blathering incoherently because she was on drugs. She was probably given substances because she was just trained to speak in tongues or whatever. She was blathering incoherently. But the priesthood would read out what she's saying is, and they would read out the prophecy or whatever. And the prophecies were always very carefully written. Very carefully written, because if the temple started siding with one king against another blatantly, then that king would stop going there for advice. And so it was always written very, very carefully. Right? There's a story of one ancient king, and he went to the temple at Delphi, and he asked the question, should I go to war with this other country? And so they got the Pythia, they got her up on her throne. They got her up on her throne, and she started blathering, blah, 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 and the priests, they said, she's saying that if you go to war, you shall destroy a great kingdom. And he said, wow, if I go to war, I'm going to destroy a great kingdom. So he went back to his country, and he went to war. And he went to war, and he lost, because the great kingdom that he was going to destroy by going to war was his own. See, they were very careful. And the way the priesthood at the Temple of Delphi, the way they operated is the kings never came alone. They always bring a big delegation of servants and military people with them. And the priests at the Temple of Delphi, they would learn to speak all the different languages. And would learn to speak all the different languages of the ancient world. They would chat up these, kings and military people and servants and get all the information they could. And they would collect that information and keep it in records. And they would also charge them money, right? It's not free. You can't just get your fortune predicted for free. And so they would charge them money, and they started acquiring wealth, and they built up a bank through which they could loan money to different countries and, money lending. And this was how the ancient world was governed. This was the beginning of what you might call globalism. This is the beginning of globalism. Globalism was the Temple of Delphi. It was the first United Nations. It was the first Council on Foreign Relations. It was the first International Monetary Fund. It was the first international bank, right? Because they were lending money. It was the first intelligence agency because they were collecting information from around the world. It oversaw negotiations between different countries. It never clearly took sides, but it had a way of pushing its own agenda. Right? They were careful. Now, if they were to just come blatantly on the side of one king, the other kings wouldn't listen to them. So they never did that, right? They gave very cryptic, carefully worded prophecies from the oracle that were very vague and could be reinterpreted to mean different things. But they carefully nudged the world in the direction that they wanted. And that was very, very clear. They gathered information, they mediated disputes, they whispered in the ear of various kings, they resolved conflicts, they lended money, they had a big bank, a big stockpile of gold, they collected intelligence, they sold information. They might pass on some of the information they gathered for a small fee. And they were one of the powerful, soft power, globalist institutions. They were the first one, really. That they were the soft power institution that dominated the ancient world. And for hundreds of years, they were the biggest force of power. When the whole world was centered around the Mediterranean, all the kings in Persia, all the kings in Egypt and in Carthage and in Greece, and they all were listening to the oracle at Delphi. And probably the biggest achievement, you could say, of the temple at Delphi was transitioning civilization away from Greece and toward Rome. They liked the Romans. And we don't really know why they liked the Romans, but they liked the Romans. They wanted Rome to be the new ruling city. The Greeks, at the beginning, when the temple was first getting going, it was Athens and Sparta and Greek city-states that had the most influence. But they liked the Roman Empire. There was something about the Roman Empire that they liked. And we don't know what it was, but they liked the Roman Empire. And I want to get back to that phrase that was on the side of the temple at Delphi. What did they inscribe on the side of the temple at Delphi? They inscribed the phrase, "Know thyself." Know thyself. Because when they were sitting down with these kings, they were getting these kings to think of themselves as individuals, not as the sovereign representing an entire nation, not as the incarnation of the people, not as the spiritual leader of a nation, but rather as individuals. It's very important, right? Because you talk about monarchies and feudalism, right? The king is different than a landlord. A landlord has his chunk of land, he has his local peasants who he's oppressing. But often the king was loved by the peasants because the king was known to protect the peasants from the local landlords. The local landlords were trying to squeeze as much out of the local peasants as they could. The peasants were resentful of the landowners, the landlords, for how they were treating them. But the king was above the nobleman, and he didn't have his own tract of land. He didn't have peasants of his own. And he had the role of appearing divine and appearing compassionate. And the king held back the landowners, right? And told them to treat the peasants nicer. And the king had this spiritual power. The king was seen as appointed by God to rule over the nation. In ancient Rome, they talk about the emperor being a god man, you know. So these kings were inculcated with the idea that they were some kind of spiritual divine force that's job it was to incarnate the will of the entire people, the will of the entire nation. But when these kings are coming to the temple at Delphi, they're being given an ideology of know thyself. Know thyself. Get to know who you are. Get to know your individual personality. Get to become, who are you really? Let's delve into your psyche. Let's delve into your dreams. Let's figure out who you as an individual are. Liberalism, the doctrine that puts the individual above all else, we know it had its roots in ancient Greece. The Greek philosophers were promoting it. And that the temple at Delphi, where the oracle gave the bullshit information, the temple at Delphi was very much a place that liberal ideas started to prevail. Know thyself was the doctrine of the priesthood at the temple of Delphi. And they mediated disputes, and they collected money for themselves, and they sat at the center of an ocean with various trade routes. Very interesting. And it was through the temple at Delphi that we started to gradually see the world shift into the hands of the Roman Empire. Rome was a city-state. It was around for quite some time. But what is the founding myth of the Roman Empire? The founding myth of the Roman Empire is that there were two brothers who were left to die, right? Romulus and Remus. And their father, for whatever reason, he couldn't raise these two twin boys who his wife gave birth to, so he dumped them by the side of the river to die. And that was a very common thing in the ancient world. Infanticide was a very common practice, not just in Rome, but in Greece and in Egypt and in Mesopotamia and in many parts of the world. Most of the ancient empires at this time committed infanticide. If a woman gave birth to a baby and the baby was deformed, they threw it in the river. If a woman gave birth to a baby and they didn't have enough money or food, they just threw it in the river. And it was encouraged. Infanticide was this ugly, horrific part of everyday life back in the ancient world. And that's why so many myths and legends about the ancient world involve children that are abandoned going on to do great things. It's one of the saddest things, but this is a thing we do in our mind. When there's something horrific, and there's something horrible in our life, we will often try to invent a myth or a story that makes us feel better about it. I'm sure you can think of examples in your own life of something awful that you had to do, something awful that you had to witness, and you reinvent some way that it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad. Well, the story of Romulus and Remus didn't happen. It was a myth or a legend. The story of Moses, right? Baby Moses, who's left in the bulrushes. It's actually stolen from, who was it? Gilgamesh, right? He's abandoned. There's so many stories in the ancient world of a baby that is left somewhere to die and instead grows up to be this amazing, dynamic hero who does great things. And that is very much a psychological attempt to rewrite this horror of everyday life, infanticide. So the legend of ancient Rome. The legend of ancient Rome is that, the founding of Rome is that these two brothers, Romulus and Remus, they're left by the river to die. They're left by the river to die, but a wolf comes along. A she-wolf, a female wolf comes along and nurses them. And they suckle the breasts of a female wolf, and they are nursed by a wolf, and they are raised by wolves. And because Romulus and Remus are raised by wolves, they don't learn to think as humans are. They're not soft and weak like humans are. They don't have any of this compassion and kindness stuff. They don't have that. Instead, they're predators. They're wild. They're tough. They're tough like wolves, and they're raised by wolves. And because they're raised by wolves, because they're like wild predators, the empire that they build, the Roman Empire is this mighty, strong empire. It's not held back by any of this primitive, compassionate kindness. That tells you a lot about the Roman Empire. But that is who the folks at the Temple of Delphi liked. They liked the Romans. They didn't like Athens. They didn't like Sparta. They didn't like Babylon. They didn't like Persia. They didn't like Carthage. They liked the Romans. They liked the Roman Empire. They liked the ideals of the Roman Empire. That's what they liked. They liked the Roman Empire. And the Temple at Delphi very much gave birth to the Roman Empire. They didn't do it directly, but they nudged through their advising of kings, through the advice that they gave through their predictions and their prophecies. They gave birth and pushed the world towards the Roman Empire. And even up into the Roman Empire, they were giving advice. I believe the last emperor to get advice from the Temple at Delphi was Julian the Apostate, if I'm not mistaken. He was the last emperor to get advice from the Temple at Delphi. They were around for a really long time. Julius Caesar got advice from the Temple at Delphi. Other people got advice from the Temple of Delphi. It was the covert, subtle institution that quietly ruled the world. And this is really important. This is really important to understand. Because after the fall of the Roman Empire, an institution emerged that was an updated version of the Temple at Delphi. And what was that institution? Well, if there's any Catholics watching, I do apologize. You may not want to hear it, but that institution was called the Vatican. Because the Vatican was very much the temple at Delphi 2.0, right? It's a place that's not aligned with any particular kingdom, not aligned with any particular kingdom, and it doesn't take sides in the conflict, but it claims to have a direct line to God. It's got a priesthood, the priesthood that learns to speak all the different languages and is gathering intelligence and information. And you can very much believe that the Vatican, which was established in Rome as the Roman Empire was falling, the Vatican was very much modeled on the temple at Delphi. This institution, this priesthood that is above all kings, to which all kings are accountable, claims to have direct divine authority, but doesn't interfere very much. You talk about the Vatican Bank and the role of the Vatican Bank. You can talk about, the fact that, the classic writings and the Bible were in Latin, and, most people didn't speak Latin, so only those who spoke Latin, had the privilege of learning Latin, could get access to religious texts. And that the Vatican was modeled on the temple at Delphi. It was modeled on the temple at Delphi. And that the Vatican and the Dark Ages in Europe, what they call the Dark Ages, when the Catholic Church ruled over Europe with absolute authority, after the fall of the Roman Empire, as the modern world, not the modern world, but what was then the known world disintegrated. And after Rome fell, you got the Dark Ages, where the Vatican had the authority, and human progress came to a halt. Human progress stopped. There was a freeze in human progress, and the life expectancy around the world went down. Human beings got shorter. Instability, war, and chaos spread. Scientific progress came to a halt. Education was frozen. A lot of the records and documents made by the Romans were burned, and human civilization very much came to a halt, and the population of Europe significantly decreased. It took 1,100 years for Europe to get back to the population level it had at the height of the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire led to a deterioration of civilization. And this very much fit that Delphic model, right? Because if you looked at Rome, there was constantly a push and pull within ancient Rome. You had figures like the Gracchi brothers, you had figures like Julius Caesar that you could say represented the city building tendency. They were trying to advance human progress. Julius Caesar, as laid out amazingly by Dr. Michael Parenti, I have his book here somewhere, right? Yeah, I have it here somewhere. His book on Julius Caesar, right? The assassination of Julius Caesar and the people's history of ancient Rome. He shows that Julius Caesar, within this horrendous empire, Julius Caesar was very much a progressive figure. He was a revolutionary. The Julius Caesar wanted to expand voting rights to different city-states that had been conquered by Rome. The Julius Caesar wanted to redistribute the land of the wealthy. That Julius Caesar created public libraries so that poor people could have access to the law and public records in order to handle their disputes. Julius Caesar freed all doctors. No more slavery for doctors. He freed educated people. He freed lots of slaves. He brought people into society. And Julius Caesar, because he was a progressive, and he essentially aligned himself with the proletariat. And who are the proletariat? The proletariat were a class that first came into existence in Rome. Never before in history had you had the proletariat as a class. In Rome, it was a slave society. Most people in Rome were slaves, meaning someone else owned them. And in addition to slaves, you had landowners, people who owned land. You had the original the original city owners, the patricians. You had new people that came into the city. They were called plebeians. But you had landowners and their slaves. But there was a new class that came into existence. All right, writing it down. Okay. Writing it down. There was a new class that came into existence. And this new class that they had in Rome, they did not own any land. They did not own any slaves. They did not own any property. But they also were not owned by anybody else. They were free men. And they were men who were free. And they were usually skilled craftsmen, bricklayers, pipe fitters. They had some kind of skill. And they were usually from somewhere else. They were not from Rome. They were from Greece. They were from Palestine. They were from North Africa. They were from Persia. They were from somewhere else. And they were neither slaves nor masters. And they sold themselves. They rented out their labor. That's how they survived. And they had to rent the place they lived because they didn't own any property. They didn't have any land to live on. So they had to rent the place in which they lived. And they rented themselves out to their boss. And they would be hired to lay bricks, or they'd be hired to fit the pipes. They'd be hired to be a blacksmith. And they were proletarians. And the word proletarian, in Latin, it literally means to have children. It's the class that owned nothing but their own children. They did not own any slaves. They did not own any land. All they had were their children. They were the class of people who have children, the procreators. That's basically what the proletarians of ancient Rome were. And when you have proletarians, a group of people who sell themselves and rent themselves out to their boss, you get things in society that no one had ever seen before. For example, Rome was the capital of the known world. And people, kings and warriors from around the world would visit Rome, and they were always shocked because they'd say, it doesn't make any sense. Rome is the capital of the known world. It is sitting at the center of the empire. All the nations of the known world pay tribute to Rome. They send their citizens as slaves to Rome. They send Rome their gold and their weapons. So why is it that in Rome we see so many homeless people? And it didn't make any sense. And there were all kinds. The streets of Rome were full of homeless people, including homeless children. There would be mobs of homeless children in Rome that they talked about. There was crime in Rome because these mobs of hungry, homeless children would rob people. They would see somebody walking down the street, and all 5 or 6 of them would jump on the person and take their property, take what food they could get. Rome was full of homeless people. How do you have homeless people? Well, you only have homeless people when you have proletarians. Slaves are never homeless. Sucks being a slave, but a slave is never homeless. Landowners, they're not homeless either. They got land. But proletarians, if they can't work, no one's hiring them, they become homeless. And in ancient Rome, we had all kinds of homeless children. All these people from around the world, these great kings and warriors would be walking around and they say, how is Rome the center, the richest place in the world, but it has so many homeless people? How is this possible? Didn't make any sense because it was the only society where you had the proletarians. And you would get situations where the proletarians would start fighting for their rights. And they would form guilds or associations. If they were paying the bricklayers too little, all the bricklayers would refuse to work. They would refuse to work. They'd have a strike until they agreed that you pay a bricklayer this much, and then they would go back to work. The blacksmiths were getting ripped off. All the blacksmiths would get together. They'd have a blacksmith meeting, and they'd say, all right, we're not going to start pounding the steel until you give us what we want. It's called a strike. And strikes were illegal in Rome. They outlawed strikes, and many times they would grab a leader of the proletarians who was organizing the blacksmiths or the carpenters or the bricklayers to demand a higher wage or a better price, and they would execute him or crucify him or or light him on fire, or feed him to the lions in the arena. So the proletarians, they had to organize underground. And this is also an interesting aspect of Roman society. In Rome, they had a state religion, right? We know about Jupiter and Mars and Venus. They ripped off all their gods from the Greek deities, right? And they gave them new names: Mars, Venus, Ares became Mars, right? Zeus became Jupiter. That was like the official religion of Rome. But in addition to that, they had what they called mystery cults. And this is one of the most fascinating things about Rome. You had mystery cults. And the mystery cults were that every job in Rome had its own religion, right? You had the cult of Neptune. Neptune was the god of the ocean. Neptune was the god of the ocean. So if you were in the Navy or you were a sailor in Rome, you worshiped Neptune. And they had a temple for Neptune. And before you went and got on your ship, you'd go do a ritual with all the other sailors at the temple of Neptune. And there were certain mystical beliefs about the ocean and about Neptune, certain legends and myths and stories that only sailors knew. And they would swear an oath to never tell anybody from another profession. And the longer that you were a sailor, the more the secrets of the cult of Neptune you'd get to learn. And there were different mystery cults, and thank you for the super chat, different mystery cults in ancient Rome. You had the cult of Dionysus, and that was the rich people who party, right? Dionysus was the god of pleasure, the god of drinking, the god of sex orgies. And the cult of Dionysus, they would, at their drinking and partying, they would have certain rituals that they would do in order to worship the god Dionysus. And again, the more you drank and partied, the more you made friends, you learned more and more of the cult of Dionysus. And these myths and legends weren't for everybody. It was only for the people that did this particular profession. It was a very strange way of running a society. You would think you'd want the whole society to be on the exact same page, right? Everyone worshiping the same religion, everyone having the same beliefs, but Rome wasn't like that. They had different beliefs for different factions, had different sects. Thank you for the super chat. All right. Okay. Comics. Writing down the super chats here. Hold on. Okay. Okay. And you had different sects, right? And there were some of these sects they would import from different parts of the world. There were different teachers and deities, gurus that would come in from different parts of the empire. They'd worship gods from ancient Egypt. They'd import, Osiris or some god from Egypt. They'd import some god from Persia, Zarathustra or something like that. There were different religious groups were brought into the city that had different rituals. It was a very strange aspect of Roman society. Okay, writing it down. And this was a big part of Roman society. So you had these proletarians. And these proletarians who had to form secret orders in order to assert their rights would organize guilds and unions and go on strike and demand higher wages. Among the proletarians, you had a mystery cult. A mystery cult that began. And that mystery cult was the mystery cult that worshipped Jesus the carpenter, or Jesus of Nazareth. This is fascinating. Many of the proletarians in ancient Rome, the skilled workers who came to Rome, were Jews from Palestine who had skills, and they came to Rome to sell their labor power. And many of them, in secret, worshipped the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, a Jew who had led an uprising against the Romans and for it been crucified and nailed to a cross. And they worshipped Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the carpenter. And among the secret organizing of the proletarians, you had the belief that one day Jesus would return and bring down the empire, and the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And Christianity started out as a religion only for Jews, but pretty soon it expanded. And in many, many ways, and this is well documented in Karl Kautsky's very important book, The Foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky. Karl Kautsky documents that Christianity in Rome was the religion of the Roman proletariat. And that's really what it was. It was the mystery cult of the proletariat. And that's why the Roman Empire so viciously persecuted Christians, because their ideology was the proletarians getting together, fighting for their rights, and predicting the day when Jesus of Nazareth would return and destroy the empire. And that's why Christianity was such an existential threat to the Roman Empire. It was an existential threat to them because it worshipped a man who'd been executed by the Romans. Crucifixion was reserved only for the most the most brutal, the most hated enemies of the Roman state. And Jesus Christ, who had been executed for standing up and opposing the Roman Empire, probably leading some kind of insurrection against the Roman Empire. And if you talk about the Messiah in the Jewish teaching, the Messiah is the one who will lead to the freedom of the Jews, will be like a military leader, a man on a white horse with a sword who will lead the Jews to freedom, lead the Jews to independence. So the fact that Jesus was considered to be the Messiah and he was then crucified for it indicates that Jesus was some kind of revolutionary who had fought against the Roman Empire and rallied and tried to lead some kind of uprising. Jesus was a lot like Spartacus. And these Roman proletarians worshipped Jesus because they saw it as a way to organize for their resistance. And this is a really fascinating and important part of Roman history. Right? And Michael Parenti, he writes about how Julius Caesar very much was a member of the Roman elite. He was a wealthy landowner, leader of the military. But he realized that the way he could gain power within the Roman elite was by getting the proletarians on his side, building a mass movement of proletarians to have his back and kick around the other Roman elites. He was a Bonapartist. That's what Julius Caesar was. He was a Bonapartist. He was like Roosevelt. He was like, I don't know, there's many, and like Louis Bonaparte, Louis Napoleon III of France, right? He was a strong man from the military who realized that in order to get his way and win over his rivals within the elite, he could build a mass movement of proletarians in order to assert his will onto the rest of society. Right? He stood above class society and he asserted his will by building a mass movement. Right? And this is, when Marx talks about in his pamphlet on Louis Bonaparte, when he talks about the Society of December 10th and how Louis Bonaparte in France, he built this army of poor, unemployed people, the La Bohème, the lumpen proletariat of Paris were mobilized by Louis Bonaparte to get their will. That's who Julius Caesar was. And that's who the Gracchi brothers were before Julius Caesar. The Gracchi brothers did the same thing. They built an army of unemployed, poor proletarians to kick around the Roman elite in order to get their will. The Bonapartism is a common formulation. You have members of one class who use members of another class to assert their will. And this is all very important because I'm leading up to the important point. I'm leading up to the most important point that I'm trying to make here, which is that the fall of the Roman Empire, the deterioration of Roman society could have been avoided because within Rome, you had Christianity, you had early Christianity, you had the proletarian movement. You had Julius Caesar, the Bonapartist. He was before Christianity. Before Christianity, you had Julius Caesar. He was killed, I think, 44 BC. And you had this conflict in Rome between the barbaric, backward primitivism upon which Rome had been founded. That myth of Romulus and Remus, that belief that one should not be human, one should be a predator, one should be cruel, one should be ruthless like an animal, one should give up their humanity. And on top of that, you had this tendency that naturally arises within human beings, what you can call the city-building tendency. This belief in historical progress, this belief in collectivism, this belief that we can move ahead and get to a better world. And that Christianity and the proletarian movement were part of the city-building tendency. Julius Caesar was part of the city-building tendency. The Gracchi brothers were part of the city-building tendency. Spartacus and his great slave revolt, they were part of the city-building tendency. And that there was a push and pull between the barbaric, primitive, backward, elitist, oligarchical tendencies of the Roman Empire and the foundations of what Rome was founded upon, what Rome was based upon. Rome had been brought into power by the oracles at Delphi, know thyself, radical individualism, infanticide, slavery, plunder. There was that. And then on top of that, you had within the human spirit the humanity of people asserting itself and pushing back and very, very much pushing back against it. And you had this push and pull within the Roman Empire, that Rome was a house divided. And a house divided upon itself cannot stand. That there were two souls in the Roman spirit. There was the city-building tendency, and there was the barbaric, reactionary, vandal tendency. And that Rome was at war with itself. Its identity was in question. What kind of society were they going to be? Julius Caesar had this vision for transforming Rome into a progressive society. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to make Alexandria and Athens and Gaul, and he wanted to create trading hubs throughout Europe and throughout the Mediterranean. He wanted to give citizenship to all the people in those trading hubs. The idea was to bring the people into the trading hubs into the government in Rome. That was the idea that he had. Julius Caesar also wanted to redistribute the land. He also wanted to hire all the unemployed proletarians and send them to start building up the great city-states that he was bringing in. He wanted to grant Roman citizenship to them. And members of the Roman elite who killed Julius Caesar. Right? Julius Caesar was killed by other members of the Roman elite who saw him as a threat to their power. Okay, I'll write it down. Thank you. Saw them as a threat to their power. And so they stabbed him to death. It was the wealthiest people in Rome who murdered Julius Caesar. On the Senate floor, in front of the statue of Pompey, he was stabbed to death. Pompey, whatever. He was stabbed to death. And that after Julius Caesar was stabbed to death, you had the rise of the emperor, right? That Rome had been a republic prior to the killing of Julius Caesar. And why was Rome a republic? Why had Rome been a republic? Why had Rome been a republic? Well, you might think that that's because, they learned democratic ideals from Greece and Athens and Sparta. Well, that's bullshit. The reason that Rome was an empire, but also a republic, the reason it had a hereditary Senate and an elected National Assembly, the reason for that was because of the fact that if you're building an empire, you need everybody to have some skin in the game. If you have just one king in your empire, not everyone's going to feel motivated to go out and fight the wars. But if you have a hereditary Senate where all the rich families are represented, where all the big leaders of the military have some role in decision making, they're going to be more motivated to go out and fight the wars because they feel like they'll be adequately represented in the process of dividing up the booty, dividing up the spoils. And that part of the reason Rome was so successful at the beginning was because it was a republic, because they were able to motivate all of the generals, all of the landowning class to come together and push the wars together, mobilize together. They were able to do that because they all felt like they had some skin in the game. They all had a seat at the table, and that it was a collective decision-making process. But it was after the death of Julius Caesar that Rome degenerated and stopped having a republic, that the republic was overturned, and you got, just the emperor. They declared the emperor was a god king. And the emperor was a god king, and he ruled over them, and that was that. And the thing was that Rome was kind of at war with itself. The death of Julius Caesar was a turning point. You can look at some other turning points that happened throughout Roman history. But it's pretty clear that city-building tendency was suppressed. And that vandal tendency in Roman society took hold. Now, excuse me. Now, I want to quickly point out, some people might say, well, Caleb, you're saying that Rome, that the city building tendency, the progressive side of Roman society that was asserting itself within this reactionary empire, this progressive side that you saw with Christianity, with Julius Caesar, with Spartacus, with others, it didn't win out. Well, why did Rome convert to Christianity then, Caleb? Did not Rome convert to Christianity? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. The conversion of Constantine, the Roman Empire, eventually was converted to Christianity. So what happened? And this is fascinating to me as well. Among the Christians in Rome, there started to be a divide. This is dialectics. This is dialectics, folks, that all things divide. One must always divide into two, right? That's what Mao Zedong said. And the Christian movement of the proletarians started to divide into two. Because as Christianity proliferated, and as more and more proletarians converted to Christianity, and as it became clear that even though they fed lots of Christians to the lions, even though they burned lots of Christians at the stake, Christianity wasn't going to go away. It had a certain hold over the population. So as Christianity proliferated, there got to be two wings of the Christian movement. This is fascinating. Because it wasn't just proletarians who converted to Christianity. You got some Roman landowners who said, hey, these Christians have got a point. They found Jesus' teachings to be insightful. There were some wealthy Romans who started converting to Christianity as well. And that in some ways, having the Christians around helped Rome. As much as the Romans didn't want to admit that, they said these Christians are a bunch of evil people. They're worshiping some revolutionary Jew from Palestine. We can't have that. As much as they said that, but some of the things that the Christians were doing were making Roman society a bit more stable. For example, I talked about the problem of homeless children. Big problem in ancient Rome. Homeless children everywhere. Homeless children all the time. What was one of the things that the Christians did? They built orphanages. by building orphanages, suddenly there were less mobs of hungry, homeless children around. And that made Roman society much more stable. And in some cases, they would have strikes and long struggles. They'd force the landowners to start paying the blacksmiths a better wage, and paying the pipe fitters a better wage, paying the bricklayers a better wage. And then there'd be less unrest among the bricklayers and less unrest among the pipe fitters. Now, some of the pipe fitters would still be radical. Others would say, hey, we got our higher wage. We're set. Things aren't so bad. And so among the early Christians, among the illegal Christian church in Rome, there became a divide. Some of the early Christians held on to the belief that Jesus would return and lead some big uprising where the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And some really held on to that belief. And others started to say, well, no. Christianity can be watered down. Christianity can be adopted and adjusted to be more compatible with our empire. And if you look at the early Christian church, there were big fights among the early Christians, because some of the early Christians wanted to hold on to Christianity as a revolutionary ideology. And other Christians thought that Christianity could be tamed a bit, and it could be turned into a mechanism through which Rome could stabilize itself. And that is what is so fascinating about the Bible. As you can tell that it's been messed with. Because Jesus is talking out of three sides of his mouth. Jesus, on the one hand, is saying that the wealthy landowning Romans are doomed, they're evil. Whoever finds his life shall lose it. Whoever loses his life shall find it. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven. I come not to bring peace to this earth, but a sword. I mean, you read some of Jesus's stuff, this guy sounds like a radical. And he's also saying, leave your whole life behind. Quit your job, leave your nets and follow me. Leave your family. If you love your mom and dad more than me, get out. You love your brother, your son or daughter more than me, get out. You love your wife more than me, get out. Leave everything behind. You're going to get executed for me. You're going to get persecuted for me, and give your life to it. And, you're in this for real. Fear nothing. Be down for the whole thing. We're in this for real. I'm coming quickly. So you better just get down with it and give your whole life to this and become a martyr, because the big battle is coming, and that's going to be it. That's one side of Jesus's mouth. On the other side of his mouth, he's saying, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. There is no government on this earth that God didn't put there. And it's, you look at it, it's like this text has been tampered with. There are different forces at play here. One of the phrases, there's a number of sayings that are in the Bible that were clearly said by, not first by Christians, but by Roman philosophers like Seneca and others, that, as you sow, so shall you reap. And a lot of these things that, these phrases that get thrown into the Bible were not originally said by Jesus. Right? They were originally said by other people in Roman society. They were around there. And even some of the aspects of the life of Jesus, are borrowed from other historical figures, other prominent teachers around there. The Bible as it currently exists is a mishmash, right? And there's some of the original Jesus in there. And there's some of the Roman philosophers in there. And there's some of the Roman Empire itself in there. And there's a lot of different things that are mixed around in there. You're not getting, I mean, this is at a time, there's no tape recorders back then. There's no video back then. There was no one writing down what Jesus was saying. You're getting what people thought a couple hundred years later, their interpretation of it. And then among those people, there was a big fight, right? We know about the Council of Nicaea, where they voted on what books actually got into the Bible. The Bible, as it has been put out, it's not verbatim the word of God. I apologize if there's any evangelicals watching, but there was a vote, and they voted some books in and they voted other books out, right? There was a fight among the early Christians about what does Christianity mean? Is it a revolutionary movement to overthrow the Roman Empire? Or is it a nice moral way of living? That became a big push and pull in ancient Rome about what was the role of Christianity. What would it be? And the book of Revelations, right? That's the one that's all spooky that everyone talks about the beast, the number of the beast, 666. And all of that. Well, if you look at the book of Revelations refers to some kind of antichrist, right? And this antichrist sounds a lot like the Roman Empire, because this antichrist runs the world economy, and he's the middleman in global trade. And what is the number of the beast, right? The idea in the book of Revelations is that everyone, in order to trade on the global economy, they have to have the mark of the beast. You have to have his permission, his license to trade on the global empire. And that the Antichrist is described as the king of the entire world. Well, this is clearly referring to Rome. And the idea is that Rome will conquer the entire world. Rome will conquer the entire world. Rome is the Antichrist. But then Jesus comes back and tears it all down and fights for justice. That's the idea. Christ reigns for 1,000 years, etc. That's very much what's written. And what's particularly interesting about that is that there's pages and pages in the book of Revelations condemning the whore of Babylon. And who is the whore of Babylon? The great whore, the whore of Babylon. It's somebody who claims to be a Christian, but sold out. I mean, that's pretty clear what it is. The whore of Babylon is supposed to be this person, this individual who spoke in the name of God, who spoke in the name of Christianity, but sold out. He was a traitor. If you read about it, it's pretty clear whoever wrote that was referring to one faction within the Christian church. And it's most likely that faction that was Romanizing Christianity. It writes, the whore of Babylon, is having sex with the Antichrist, it's saying that this holy individual speaks in the name of God, but instead is working for the Antichrist, is working for the empire. And this is a fight. This is a rant against the sellout Christians who were watering down the revolutionary aspects of Christianity, completely watering them down and reinventing them to be ways of making Roman society more stable. Okay. All right, wrote it down. This is all fascinating stuff because, this is important because you should all be looking at the Junius pamphlet by Rosa Luxemburg. Rosa Luxemburg was a great Marxist revolutionary. She opposed World War I. She refused to sell out. And because she opposed World War I and because she refused to sell out, she was thrown in prison. And she wrote this pamphlet, this anonymous pamphlet opposing World War I. And she wrote it, she wrote it opposing World War I. And because she wrote it, she was thrown in prison. And in the Junius pamphlet, she compares the rise of imperialism to the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire. And that's what she says, right? That imperialism is leading Western civilization down the path that will lead to barbarism. And that's where the famous phrase socialism or barbarism, that's where it comes from. The idea is that just as the Roman Empire deteriorated, right, and as Rome abandoned the city building tendency and became more and more of a vandal, pessimistic, hedonistic, destructive, primitivist society, as it deteriorated, Rome fell apart and became more cruel and barbaric. That Rosa Luxemburg is saying that imperialism and the economic system that Lenin describes in his book Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, where big corporations and banks dominate the global economy by holding back economic development, by being the middleman in global trade, by keeping the world poor so that they can stay on top of it. And that would ultimately lead not necessarily to socialism, not necessarily to the working class rising up and taking power, but it could lead to further deterioration. It could lead to a historical regression of society becoming less and less stable, society becoming more unstable, and that the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Vatican and the rise of the Dark Ages were not a good time. And things didn't start to change in Europe until the Renaissance and until the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation and then the Renaissance, there was an awakening. But when the Vatican, the Temple at Delphi 2.0 ruled over the world, it was a dark time in human history. And the main reason it was a dark time was because they weren't allowing scientific progress. The guilds that existed, all the skilled trades that existed had a rule that you couldn't change the way you did things. Blacksmiths weren't allowed to invent new mechanism, more efficient ways of blacksmithing. Bricklayers were not allowed to invent new ways of laying bricks, and that science was being suppressed, and human advancement was being suppressed, and people were being told, just be happy with what you have. Don't want more. It was considered a sin to want more. It was considered a sin to want to advance your social position. If you were born into a peasant position, you should be happy to be born in a peasant position. You were born, into the nobility. You should be happy to be born in the nobility. Be happy with what you have. Accept what you have. And the Vatican was very much a degrowth institution. Less is more. Be happy in your poverty. That was the message. That was the message that the Vatican was putting out there. That was the message that the forces holding back human progress were promoting. Feudalism was very much a degrowth kind of society. Growth is bad. Be happy with what you have. And that they had this problem. I know I'm saying a lot of things tonight, but I don't care. Hey, I love you guys. There's nobody I'd rather be talking to tonight than you. So I'm just spouting on about history. I'm going to take you in a whole new direction now. We're going to go in a whole new direction. I wasn't even planning to talk about this, but I don't care. There's a problem they had in feudalism. This is fascinating. In feudalism, the population would increase. Right? Human beings tend to have more babies. The more humans you have, they tend to get married and have children. But in feudalism, you're not advancing the means of production. You're not inventing new ways to grow food. You're not inventing new ways to build your society. So in feudalism, if the population increases, you've got a problem. In our society, no. I mean, if the population increases, we invent new technology, right? The human population has been expanding. But in feudalism, right, if the population goes up, you've got a problem. And in all feudal societies, not just in Europe, but in Europe, they had this problem. They also had this problem in China. You look at the history of China. You read about what they called peasant wars. This is fascinating. Every couple hundred years in feudalism, you have a peasant war because there's too many peasants and there's food shortages. And there's going to be some kind of famine usually. There's going to be a bad crop. The peasants are going to be hungry. And so they're going to get together and they're going to rise up. And they call this millenarianism. You can read about this phenomenon in feudal society. They call it millenarianism. I know you guys love it. I know you. I know you do. I know you do. Millenarianism. That it was just part of the cycle. That every couple hundred years, they have millenarianism, they call it. And the Catholic Church has all kinds of writings about signs of millenarianism. And what is millenarianism? It's fascinating. It's just a phenomenon. It's just a thing that happens, right? It's just considered part of the normal historical cycle. When you have feudalism, you have millenarianism. Millenarianism, right? And it just happens. And it's a group of people, a bunch of peasants, start thinking that it's the end of the world. They think it's the end of the world. There's usually some kind of godlike person, like a prophet, some kind of person who's claiming to be a prophet or claiming to be a god who's leading them. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, I'm looking it up now, rejects all forms of millenarianism, right? And there's some individual who leads the peasants and is saying to the peasants, the kingdom of God is coming, and tells them to rise up and fight to build God's kingdom on earth. And usually, and this is interesting, usually the millenarian cults, there's some form of weird sadomasochistic practice. They all start whipping themselves and flogging themselves, or they start whipping each other, and there's some weird sadomasochistic practices that go on. And there's usually some kind of individual that they worship, some kind of person, some kind of false prophet who comes along and says, I'm here to lead the creation of God's kingdom on earth. And the peasants rally around this person, and they rise up against feudalism. And there's a big, ugly war between the old feudal order and the peasants that are rising around the millenarians. And this is just considered part of the normal cycle. In China, this happened. China had nothing to do with Europe, but in China, they had this issue, right? They had big peasant wars. And in Germany, they had the peasant wars in Germany, Thomas Munzer, right? And it's just this thing that just happens. Is under feudalism, every so often, the population has gone up. There's food shortages, and there's a famine, and the peasants have had enough of being oppressed, and there's usually something going on with the sexual repression, that like people are tired of being sexually oppressed or whatever. And so the peasants get together and they're stripping naked and they're whipping each other, and they're following some guy who's claiming to be a prophet, and they're killing the landlords and murdering the landlords, and they're saying it's the end of the world, and they're saying that these are the end times. And there's a big ugly war as a result of this. The peasant armies face off with the old society's armies, and a bunch of soldiers get killed, and a bunch of peasants get killed, and then the population goes down and everything gets back to normal. Can you imagine this? This is considered part of like the normal cycle of a feudal society, millenarianism. Very, very odd. Very, very odd. And this is something that goes on in feudal societies, right? And that, in China, what you call the Taiping uprising, right, was the last millennial uprising. China was a feudal society in the 1800s. And so you had this guy, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, this guy who claimed he was Jesus's younger brother, that led this huge civil war across China. No one knows about this, right? The Taiping uprising, right? Jason Unruhe claimed I made it up, right? He claimed it wasn't real. It was historical revisionism. No, it's definitely a huge event in Chinese history. The Taiping uprising, the war, the Taiping rebellion, right? And it was a peasant uprising. And if you look throughout China's history, peasant wars and peasant uprisings happened every so often. It happened every so often. Here, I'll put the link here, right? And it happened every so often. Every so often you get somebody coming along, a false prophet who starts leading the peasants in this end times uprising, right? And you had Thomas Munzer in Europe, in Japan, you had the Shimbara Rebellion. That was very famous in Japan, the peasants of Japan. Shimabara Rebellion, very famous, right? 1638. The Christian missionaries from Spain had just gotten to Japan, and some peasants got their hands on some Christian literature, and they said, Jesus, and oh, okay, we'll take it. And all of a sudden, all over Japan, the peasants are rising up, and they think it's the end times, and they say that, Jesus is going to return, and they're whipping themselves and flogging themselves and taking their clothes off, and they're executing the landlords, and it's just part of the cycle of feudalism. And that's the problem with feudalism, is that feudalism holds back historical progress. The main reason these millenarian uprisings are happening is because feudal society is very disciplined. In feudal society, everyone has their place. You're a peasant, you're a man, you're a woman, you're a peasant, You're a noble, you're a soldier, you're the king. You're a blacksmith. You have a few skilled trades, not many. You have a few craftsmen, blacksmiths, barbers. Oh, I don't know if they didn't have barbers, but they have a few skilled trades, and you're born into it. You inherit it from your father, and that's it, right? And everyone kind of knows their place. However, the population increases. Trade with other countries happens, and suddenly society starts to go, right? Society becomes constipated. Society is going, society is wanting to move forward. More people are being born. The technological level has gone up. And feudalism can't handle that, right? In feudalism, everyone's supposed to know their place. There's no social mobility, divine right of kings, and society is just supposed to go. And so every couple hundred years, human beings do what human beings naturally do, and they start inventing new things, and they have more children, and society goes, and so then you have this big explosion. You have a Millenarian revolt. You have the peasant wars in Germany. You have the Shimbara rebellion. You have the Taiping uprising. Feudal society can't handle human progress. Feudal society is designed to hold back and stop human progress. This is very important. Feudalism is eternal, right? They talk about in China before the revolutions. If anyone ever has said to the landowners, they said, do you think the peasants will ever rise up? They'd say, well, will the sun ever set in the east? It was just, there's this natural order, and everyone just naturally has their place. Well, after a while, human beings get to the point that it just isn't going to work. And so then you have a big bloodbath. And there's examples of these peasants actually winning in some cases. They actually take over an area, and they have like some kind of egalitarian form of farming. They have some little commune someplace, and it lasts a little bit, but eventually the old order retakes them. And this is a phenomenon that happens in feudalism. But it wasn't until you had the emergence of the mercantile class. You had the Silk Road from Asia. You had the traders. That it wasn't until a higher economic mode had been developed that these kind of peasant uprisings that just kind of routinely happened could be turned into something different, right? It wasn't until the 1790s you got the French Revolution. The peasants of France had risen up many times. There had been many rebellions. But it was when there was a new class that emerged that could hijack those rebellions for their own purposes, that could bring in a higher economic order. It was then that you saw feudalism being broken apart. It was when there was a technological advance that laid the basis for a new class and a new mode of production. It was then that you saw feudalism being overturned in Europe. Only when a higher mode of production, only when a higher form of society could emerge, could these kind of rebellions that just kind of naturally happened in feudal society turn into something different. And I think that's really fascinating. I think that's really, really fascinating. So there's a lot that I've said here tonight that is of interest. And I guess I'm reflecting on world history. I'm reflecting on Rome. I'm reflecting on the Oracle and the Pythia, Delphi, and I'm reflecting on the fall of the Roman Empire and Julius Caesar. I'm reflecting on Christianity, on Millenarianism. I'm reflecting on the Catholic Church and how they were like the Temple at Delphi. I'm reflecting on the French Revolution and feudalism in Europe. I'm talking about all these things because they're all important. They're all important, right? If you want to just keep up with world events, I do my best to keep up with world events, but I'm not, I'm a news reporter for my job, but I'm not a news junkie. Right. And I do my best to do my job and report on things, but I always try to have a long form historical perspective to understand the objective laws of history and try to draw lessons from it about the human spirit, about how we can intervene in our time. I think this is all really, really important. When you talk about the elite and how they maneuver, you talk about different factions and Bonapartism, you talk about human beings striving to get to a higher plane. These are the kind of things I love to talk to you all about. And you love it. You all love it. I know you do. I know you love it. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to ramble about these things. So I think now we're going to do our roll call. We're going to do our roll call So let's do the roll call, and we'll do the roll call, and then I'll start answering super chat questions. I do have a little surprise for you before I answer the super chat questions. We're going to do the roll call first. So names and locations, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Carolyn in Staten Island. Shout out to you. We got Mark in Utica, right? We got Micah in Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Nico, Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Daniel from India, Luis from Spain, Cedar Park, Texas, Miami, Florida, Rose from Texas. We got UK, Rice from Adelaide, Australia, Mike in Baltimore, Robert from Hawaii, Vancouver, Temple City, California, Australia, Schmoll, right? Taiwan, China, Ash in Chicago. Shout out to you. Terry from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Welcome, welcome. Tasmania. Wow. Kevin in Baltimore, Union City, New Jersey, Toronto, Canada, Yada Yisrael in Chicago, Texas. Very, very good. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Springfield, Massachusetts. Hussein in Lebanon. Wisconsin. Kami John. Portland, Oregon. Kieran from San Diego. Auckland, New Zealand. Springfield, Massachusetts. Kami John in Wisconsin. Nicola. Shout out to you, Nicola. Chester in England. Right? Smash the button for Caleb. Oh, you're too kind. Glasgow, Scotland. Alex in Brazil. Novato, California. Hit like Kaiser from Hong Kong. Trinidad and Tobago. Isaac. Moscow, Russia. David Hamilton. Samir Husani in Moscow, Russia. David Hamilton in Canada. Kaiser from Hong Kong. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Who else is with us tonight? Names and locations. Always good to find out who's on the other side of the camera. Who's on the other side of the camera? I'm sitting here rambling about ancient Rome. We got David in Hamilton, Canada. We got Gary Curtis from Indiana. Robin from Missouri. St. David's, Bermuda. Nate from Sydney, Australia. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff, folks. All right. Very good. All right. So I have a few super chats written down. Keep the super chats rolling in because that's what's going to make our show last longer. Ben in Suffolk County, DD in India. But I've got a surprise for you all. A surprise. A surprise. I don't ever want to do anything in too much excess. We have a lot of different ways we do things on here. I have little segments where I just kind of give you my opinion about different things. I have big speeches like I just did where I ramble about history. But one thing we've been doing a lot of on here is reacting, right? Where I show Vosh, or I show Noam Chomsky, or I show other people. What can we learn from Hannah Arendt after criticizing her anti-populism? All right. We have different things we can talk about, and we react to different things. I did Jordan Peterson the other night. I did Vosh. I did Noam Chomsky. So this is a short one. This won't take too long, but, we love to hate this guy. We really do. We really do. And he's asking for it. He's asking for it. He dressed so amazingly to make this video. It's very short, and it's very wrong on a number of points. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with the great Jason Unruhe and his critique of my defense of the Dutch farmers.
Regulations on the rich, and you say, no, could you please buy this fertilizer? Okay, now you have to buy this fertilizer that has less of an issue with causing the destruction of the planet, and it's a little bit more expensive. They throw a fit, because their profit margins won't be as big as they were.
Actually, Jason, the reason their profit margins are going to be not as good is because they're going to put out less produce. Right? That seems to be the issue. And there's some other issues too. Okay, writing it down. But the issue is that their crop output is going to go down. I don't know if you've noticed Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka, they were forced by BlackRock, which is a investment firm in the United States, and in Britain, they were forced by them to go organic in order to get their credit rating better, their green credit rating better. And so they went organic, and the result was a much lower crop output, and it led to a whole big problem in the country. I don't know if you're aware of this. So, these kind of environmental policies, in a lot of cases, they result in the amount of food that farmers grow decreasing. And that is definitely going to cut into their profit margins. You bet it will. It'll also reduce the amount of food that's on the market. And we're having a global food crisis right now, Jason. I don't know if you're aware of this, but malnutrition related deaths in Africa have significantly gone up since the pandemic. I don't know if you're aware of this, Jason, but because of the fight in Ukraine, Russia's ability to export its grain is being limited. Ukraine's crop output is going down. There's going to be a global food crisis. Now, you and I, Jason, we live in the first world, so we're probably going to be okay. But in Africa, where there's already limited access to food, people are going to die because of this. So the last thing that any country on the world should be doing right now is trying to figure out how to reduce crop output. So the fact that these Dutch farmers are having policies imposed on them that will reduce the amount of crops they're putting out, and that they're taking farmland away from these farmers, right? They're reducing the amount of farmland overall. I think that's a little bit of a problem. And I know you just want us to hate them because they're rich. We're supposed to hate these farmers because they're rich. But I think the issue is they're going to produce less food, and that ain't good. That ain't good. But continue, Jason.
So, naturally, when you have the rich complaining about not making enough money, you have Pat Socks jumping on them, defending them. And then turning around saying, "Whoa, look, here's a workers' thing, and once again, leftists are looking for a way to stand against it or oppose it."
It's not about the class nature of those farmers, Jason. It's about the fact that their output is going to go down during a food crisis, my friend. When there's a global problem of food shortages and people are going to die of malnutrition, generally you want there to be more food, not less. I know we're supposed to hate these farmers because they're rich. Someone else told me that some of them did business in apartheid South Africa or something like that. Again, the issue is people around the world are going to starve, that the USA has created a global food crisis with its attacks on Russia and with BlackRock pushing these green policies that drive food production down. And now they're forcing these farmers to give up a lot of their land. They're forcing these farmers to use fertilizer that is less effective. It's not going to grow as many crops, and they're going to have less food to put out there. And we're in the middle of a global food crisis. That's the issue, Jason.
That's not what's happening. When the rich are throwing a fit because they don't want to have to give a damn about the planet, that's not Malthusianism.
It's the ultra rich that are pushing these policies, Jason. You do know that these policies are also being implemented by rich people, right? That yes, some of these farmers are rich. However, Bill Gates is also rich. BlackRock is also rich. The owners of the World Business Forum, the World Economic Forum, they're also rich. Most of the people pushing for degrowth are very, very rich. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yes, these farmers are rich, but the people trying to restrict their crop output are also very, very rich and probably a lot richer. So continue, Jason.
Buzzword that you use to describe everything it is that you don't like. This is not degrowth. It's
not degrowth. So these farmers who grow food are having policies imposed on them that will result in them growing less food. The amount of food being produced will go down. This is not degrowth. What is degrowth if it's not the amount of growth going down? It's not degrowth. Oh, boy.
Literally trying to save the planet from global warming. That scientifically proven fact that you don't believe in because you're actually a rightist pretending to be a leftist. Now, of course, we would have this problem with the Panthers because they do pretend to be socialists when in fact they keep supporting not only right-wing organizations but right-wing viewpoints as well. And
since when is wanting more food to be produced during a global food crisis a right-wing position? If that's a right-wing position, there is something really, really wrong. When Mao came to power in China, did he reduce the amount of food China had? No. When Stalin came to power in Russia, did he reduce the amount of food Russia had? No. In fact, you look at what the socialist countries of the world do. They push growth. They raise countries out of poverty with 5-year economic plans, socialist construction, Stakhanovism. They build these countries up. So if you think that wanting more food to be produced, not less, is somehow a right-wing position, oh boy, we got a problem here, Jason. I mean, if left-wing means making people poorer because global warming, we got a problem.
For them, the less said about Alexander Dugin, the better. So,
Dugin doesn't believe in historical progress. Dugin believes the past, present, and future are equal. So Dugin doesn't fit in with this at all. I don't think Dugin talks about degrowth. He doesn't talk about Malthusianism. That has nothing to do with Alexander Dugin. Have you ever read anything that Alexander Dugin ever wrote, Jason? Are you just like throwing his name in there because he's this big, scary Russian guy with a beard like you? I mean, do you know anything about Dugin? Dugin does not talk about this issue at all, as far as I can tell. Dugin is a conservative. He's a traditionalist in Russia. Like, Dugin is not on top of this stuff. I have not seen a statement from Dugin on the Dutch farmers. Dugin generally does not believe in historical progress. He's into postmodernism. And so Dugin has absolutely nothing to do with this, except that everyone who doesn't agree with the CNN position is a Nazi. I mean, that's basically what they think, right? They can't tell the difference between Dugin and LaRouche and me and Haas and, Venezuela and Cuba. It's like anyone who doesn't go along with the CNN narrative, we're all the same. We're all, and being a leftist just means you agree with CNN. CNN hates the Dutch farmers. So does Jason. Continue.
What do we have? We have Caleb Maupin and the rest of the usual suspects saying that this is an attempt to, this is for degrowth. This degrowth. They're trying to be the Malthusian.
Yes, actually. They are trying to impose policies on the Dutch farmers that will reduce their crop output. And they will have less. They will produce less food. That is degrowth, Jason. That is degrowth.
To which now, this is starting to get to the point where I'm going to have to ask, are these Malthusians in the room with us right now? Are these degrowth people in the room with us right now?
That's such a poor delivery of that joke. It's really a poor delivery of that joke, right? But continue.
Because this whole degrowth thing seems to be something wholly manufactured by you. I'm sure you have found tweets from a couple nut jobs and a very few small, nearly insignificant sources, and you think it's this global, worldwide conspiracy by the...
A few nut jobs. Didn't Richard Wolff just make a video promoting degrowth? I think he did. Let's pull up some interesting things. Just a few isolated nut jobs, right? No one's talking about degrowth, right? It's all just what is this book that is widely available? This is one of the main socialist books you can find at American bookstores. What is this book? What is it called here? We got The Future is Degrowth, A Guide to a World Beyond Capitalism. That is one of the main socialist books being sold right now, equating critique of capitalism with degrowth. Oh, but what else? What else, right? What else we got here? What else? What other popular leftist titles might be promoting this? What else do we got there? Oh, we've got, what else? We got Less is More, How Degrowth Will Save the World by Jason Hickel. And it's endorsed by what group there? Extinction Rebellion, one of the main left-wing groups that's going around protesting global warming, is a degrowth organization. Wow. But it's all in our heads, right? Degrowth isn't a thing, Caleb. You just made up degrowth. It's like he didn't even deliver that joke very effectively. Degrowth is really being pushed hard in leftist circles right now. Right? It's really, really, really being pushed hard. Michael Moore pushed it in his Planet of the Humans documentary. I'm sorry, degrowth is everywhere in left-wing circles, but I guess I just made it all up, right? I just made it all up.
National bankers. But trust me, there really is no such thing. Actually,
is BlackRock an international bank? And did they push degrowth policies?
Going on. In fact, we keep going forward and driving this entire planet towards its inevitable destruction.
Well, the fact, Jason, that you are just confirming exactly what I'm saying, right? Did you see what he just did there? He said, nobody believes in degrowth. It's obscure. And actually, we just keep going forward, and that's bad. Well, if you think growth is bad, Jason, you're promoting degrowth. The idea that growth is bad, that somehow human beings should have less, that's called degrowth, Jason. That's what you're promoting. But continue.
So the protests have certainly started to get out of hand. A teenager was shot after he was driving a tractor towards the police. Now, of course, ACAB, but if you drive a tractor at the police, you know what's going to happen. And if you're willing to make that sacrifice, then that's totally up to you. But
no comment. That just doesn't deserve a comment. I mean, Mr. Leather Jacket there with his Antifa flag, that part, it just, no comment, Jason. No comment.
Create very obvious consequences.
Oh, they do, Jason.
Especially when you're doing it in favor of the rich. And so,
against another faction of the rich that's way more powerful, that wants to drive down the world food supply and make everyone a lot poorer because they think growth is bad, because they want to stay at the top of the planet. And there's already a food crisis going on, and millions of people in the third world are going to die. But continue, Jason. Continue.
So forth. Now, if this really was about degrowth and all that, why are these pantsocks not up in arms now about China?
Well, how about the fact that China has a war on deserts and they're creating more farmland than ever? How about the fact that China has lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty? China is doing the opposite of degrowth. They've eradicated extreme poverty. They're waging war on deserts and creating farmland. They're advancing fusion energy, which could get us out of the nightmare of fossil fuels, which all these people that claim they're so worried about global warming and carbon emissions, I never see them supporting fusion energy. Just saying, right? It's always, global warming just means everyone has to be poorer. Never see them promoting China's work around fusion energy. But continue.
China has decided to take tons of farmland and return it to nature.
Actually, they're doing the opposite. They've taken tons of deserts and made them arable land. They've increased their crop outputs hugely, vast expansion in their food production apparatus. There was hunger every day, malnutrition all the time before the revolution. Millions of Chinese people have been lifted out of poverty. Look at what China is doing right now, not just in China, but around the world, building infrastructure. It's not degrowth, my friend. That is not what degrowth looks like. You think that farmers in the European countries being told they have to produce less is not degrowth, but somehow China lifting millions and millions of people out of poverty and building infrastructure all over the world and eradicating deserts and making them into, arable land. Somehow that is degrowth. You're just completely losing me now, Jason.
So they're deliberately destroying farmland. And because we know that material reality is now infinite, according to Maupin, why are they not up in arms about the Chinese degrowth policy that's now being put through that they are so adamantly against?
Because it's not degrowth, because they're raising people up out of poverty, because they're doing the opposite of degrowth, building infrastructure, because that's not what China's doing. I'm sorry. It's like, you look at Dutch farmers being told to put out less food, and that's not degrowth. But somehow China raising millions of people out of poverty and constructing around the world is degrowth. I'm lost, Jason.
Where is it? Why aren't they up in arms about this and instead coming to the aid of rich landlords? Very much like what they did with the trucker convoy in Canada, the so-called Freedom Convoy being led by a guy who said that the numbers of dead in the Holocaust were exaggerated, that Caleb didn't know about because he didn't research the guy who was leading the protest, which very much tells you that he's either a liar or he's incompetent.
Or maybe my whole criticism was that leftists should have been leading the protest, Jason. That maybe when working people are angry at the government and are trying to assert their rights, maybe that's when communists should be leading them and not just defending the status quo. Maybe that's what I said. Did that ever occur to you? Did it ever occur to you that, that our job isn't simply to defend the liberal order from conservative opposition? Did it ever occur to you that the reason that these people that are angry at the status quo are rallying around the right wing is because leftists like you have dropped the ball and just become shills of the establishment? But continue, please.
So, I think it's really important to understand not only just exactly who these farmers are, what they represent, what they're doing, and what they're about, but to also understand the context in which it appears.
Like, you mean a global food crisis that we're on the brink of, where people all over Africa and Latin America and other parts of the world are not going to have food because of U.S. imperialism and because of their degrowth organic policies they forced on countries like Sri Lanka, and because of the war that they fomented, the NATO conflict they fomented in Ukraine. There's going to be shortages of food, and the context, that's what the context of this is, Jason. That's what the context is. Yeah.
Efforts to not destroy the planet by switching to another kind of fertilizer and having regulations is not...
And drive down the food supply at a time we're already having food shortages. It's a little bit of a concern, isn't it? I mean, isn't Jason supposed to be a third worldist? What kind of third worldist wants to starve people in the third world because that's what a bunch of wealthy, white environmentalists want to do? What kind of third worldist wants crop output to go down because that's what BlackRock and Bill and Melinda Gates want to do? I'm sorry. I mean, this guy's supposed to be a third worldist, right? We're all evil, first world privileged people, but he doesn't seem interested in actually helping people in the third world. I think he wants to starve them. He wants to starve the third world in order to please a bunch of wealthy people in the first world, because it's trendy among hip liberals in the first world.
Same thing as lining people up and having to shoot them.
Yes, actually, depriving people of food, Jason, is the same thing. If you kill people by mass starvation, if you impose policies that reduce global food output, that is like lining people up and shooting them. That's basically what it is. Creating a food crisis and using the food crisis as an opportunity to push these organic policies that reduce crop output, as Samantha Power indicated they want to do. That is killing people. That is what it is, Jason. You are going to kill people in the third world because the Dutch farmers are racist.
That's not Malthusianism. That's just trying to save the planet.
Yeah. Driving down the population and saying the problem is there's too many people in the world, and trying to reduce the amount of food that's put out there and trying to drive down living standards in order to stabilize the economy. The belief that the problem isn't the irrational capitalist system that's holding back growth. The problem is somehow just that there's too many people in the world. Who invented the word overpopulation, Jason? Who invented that word? Who invented the word? Malthus.
Malthusian is when you softly deny the existence of COVID.
I don't deny the existence of COVID. I've had COVID, my friend. I've had COVID. I don't deny the existence of it.
Restrictions oppose vaccines on it, leading...
I don't oppose vaccines. I'm vaccinated, Jason. So I don't oppose vaccines. I'm vaccinated.
Public, particularly the elderly, the already immunocompromised, so that the convenience of most and the profits of the elite can flow. That is Malthusian.
Jason, what country had the highest COVID deaths? What country had the highest COVID deaths? It must have been China, right? Their evil communist policies killed everybody. Must have been Russia, right? Must have been Cuba. Must have been Vietnam. Oh, wait. The highest COVID deaths. What country had the highest COVID deaths? Let's find out. What country had the highest COVID deaths? What country had the highest COVID deaths? According to BBC, an article published on the 12th of May, it was the United States that had the highest COVID deaths. U.S. deaths were above global average. According to all the data I'm seeing, the United States had the highest COVID death rate. So if you're telling me that by criticizing U.S. policies around COVID, I'm killing people, I've got a feeling that you're a little bit wrong. The U.S. government's policies on COVID have a few problems, I think. Jason needs to Google President Xi's Global Development Initiative. I guess it's degrowth, right? China building high-speed railway and hospitals all over the world is degrowth. This is fun. I love to hate people like this. So there we go. Just wanted to bring Jason on there. That's what my critics are saying now. That's a little bit fun. That's fun stuff, isn't it? Isn't that entertaining? That's fun stuff. Jason Unruhe, everybody. The Dutch farmers are bad because they want to put out more food, and restricting the amount of food that goes out is not degrowth, but China building hospitals and schools all over the world is degrowth. And if you criticize U.S. government policies, that makes you Malthusian, even though U.S. government policies led to more COVID deaths than anywhere else. That, folks, is the great Jason Unruhe. We love you, Jason. Thank you for that great debate. Awesome stuff. All righty. Great costumes, guys. I mean, wasn't that a great costume? I was impressed with the costume. Aren't you glad I don't wear costumes? I just do my suit thing, but I don't, you want me to come out in like a leather jacket and a visor, maybe wear a Halloween mask or something. So there you go. But there you go. All right. So now I'm going to start answering super chat questions. So if you have another thing for me to answer, another question for me, just shoot me a super chat and I will answer it. First question, the IWW as it currently stands. What do I think of it? I don't have a very high opinion of the currently existing IWW. There's probably a lot of great people that are in it. I know, there were some people I used to know who were in it, who were real revolutionaries and communists. There were some people that I knew that were in another state that were in it. There were some people, there's probably a lot of great people in it. But my understanding is the current IWW is dominated by, anarcho-liberal politics, right? It's not what it once was. It's not the IWW of Joe Hill and, Eugene Debs and William Z. Foster and people like that. It's not that IWW anymore. It's very much an anarcho-liberal kind of outfit. I went to some protests by the IWW. They used to have a union campaign going on at the Starbucks in Union Square. And, I support any union. But my understanding is the current IWW as it exists is not a super revolutionary group. But, best of luck to you. Sure thing. Best of luck to you in all of your, if you end up joining. What do I think of supply side economics? Well, my understanding is supply side economics is austerity, right? It's this idea that you can cut your way into growth, right? The idea is that if you cut taxes on rich people, you cut regulations on corporations, if you cut, you cut social spending, you cut government jobs, you cut, welfare programs, that somehow you can have growth. That you can cut your way into economic growth. And it doesn't work that way. You cannot cut your way into growth. You get rid of government jobs, all those people who used to work for the government don't have the spending money they once had. If you get rid, let me add, of welfare programs, all the people who used to get food stamps and all the people who used to get cash assistance don't spend that money anymore. You don't have it. If you cut the taxes on rich people, generally their money just sits there because they only invest it to make a profit. However, if you cut taxes on average working class people, their incomes go up and they spend that money. So yeah, supply side economics, generally the idea that we need to take care of the ultra rich, we need to cut social spending, we need to cut government jobs, cut taxes on the rich. It doesn't work. It tends to lead to society falling apart. You cannot cut your way into growth. You can't do it. Austerity economics does not work. That is my understanding. Next question. Does the current elite see the writing on the wall? Some of them have got to. I think that there is a realization on some of the smarter capitalists that China is just going to be a factor. Russia and China are not going to go away. It might be better to do business with them, might be better to kind of try to compromise and negotiate with them existing rather than to just have an all-out war against them. I think there are some of the elite that realize that. Not all of them, but, among the elite, there's often a soft power section that says, look, Russia and China are not just going to go away. We're not going to be able to just completely obliterate them. So it's better we do business, and I appreciate the real bit because, look, I think trading with China is good. Trading with Russia is good. Getting rid of sanctions on anti-imperialist countries is a good thing. I think there are some of the elite that realize that. Not all of them. I think the majority of the elite kind of want to do a holding action where they just drive down living standards so they can stay on top. The fact that Russia and China are unleashing growth around the world, and they see that as a threat. And there you go. There you go. All right. Next question. ISIS wants to take Syria because it's Alawite, the only secular Arab state. Yeah, I mean, Syria is an independent country. The Syrian Arab Republic, led by the Ba'ath Socialist Party, where the major centers of economic power are run by the state. They have 5-year economic plans. They have labor unions in the factories. They have a communist party, 2 communist parties that are in the government, the Syrian Communist Party and the Syrian Communist Party, Bakdash. Are both in the government and represented and very influential. And, they do have, Syria is a target. And in Syria, yes, the president is from an Alawite family, but his wife is a Sunni. The majority of the country are Sunnis, but you have Shia, you have Christians, a very big Christian section of the population. The Wahhabi element really does want to destroy it. No question about it. They see that as a threat, right? There's the Oded Yanan plan. They want to, instability. Israel wants instability among the Muslim world, chaos among Muslims. That's what they want. So that certainly exists. And that there's, the fact that you do have different religious and ethnic groups in Syria living together. That is certainly a threat to the power structure, right? And then there's this conspiracy theory the Saudis promote about the Shia crescent. Right? They claim that Iran and the Shia are all secretly working for Iran to take over the Middle East, take over the world. That's not true. That's bullshit. There's various things. But yeah, Syria is a strong, independent, socialist country. And that's why it's being targeted. Right? Alliance with other anti-imperialists. Is it just a pipe dream? Can we talk about? Yes, I think it's very possible. Look, the lower levels of capital, the lower level capitalists, right now they're libertarian, right? Because they are like, we want the government to get out of things. We just want to get wealthy, lower taxes on the rich, deregulate. But sooner or later, they're going to get so badly clobbered by the ultra rich, by the degrowth faction. And they're going to really want to trade with Russia and China because that's where there's, Russia and China keep growing. And the lower level capitalists want to grow. They want to make more money, right? The ultra rich want to keep their monopoly. They want to stay at the top, but the lower level capitalists are going to want to do business with Russia and China. And they're also going to want to keep growing, and they're also going to be so badly clobbered by the rich, the ultra rich, that they're going to say, look, we want a government of action that will fight for working families, and that's our goal. We need to build a united front of anti-imperialists that will include the labor movement and the labor unions, like Chris Smalls and his heroic efforts at Amazon. that will include, the Starbucks union efforts, that will include the socialist countries, Cuba, Venezuela, other anti-imperialist states, but will also include the lower level capitalists. I think we can build an anti-imperialist bloc here in America. Just like, in China, you had the block of four classes with the proletarians and the Communist Party at the center of it, and a proletarian ideology guiding it. You had different classes and different groups at the center of it. That's what communists in the United States need to do. We need to build a united front against the imperialists right here in America. An anti-imperialist bloc in the center of the empire needs to be built. And we absolutely need it. We absolutely need it. And exposing degrowth and challenging this notion that growth is bad that's so widespread in leftist circles can be the beginning of that, I think. Since the USA will allow self-determination for oppressed nations, will it be a fraction of its current size? Well, this is an important point, because allowing self-determination is not the same thing as demanding separation. Self-determination means that the oppressed group has the right to separate or integrate as they choose. That's what that means. That's what it means. All right. So we're not saying that we necessarily want the black people to separate from the United States. If the black people choose to have the Black Belt South or an independent black republic separate from the United States, I would support that. At this time, that is not what the majority of African Americans want. And you have to be clear about that. Same for Native Americans, right? If the Native American people choose to have a separate country, a separate government, I would recognize their right to independence. I would grant, I would be in favor of reparations to help, the setting up of their new state. But if they chose that, the same for the Sun Belt, if the majority of Chicanos living in the old Southwest that was stolen from Mexico, if they chose to have Aztlan, a separate country, if they chose it, I would respect their right to do so. But that doesn't mean I go around advocating it, because as a white guy, if I go around advocating that sounds like segregation. It sounds like I'm saying that we want the races to be separate, right? And that's, black people have fought for the right to drink out of the same drinking fountains as white people. They fought for the right to have jobs in white-owned businesses, et cetera. So, you can't go around advocating separation. Self-determination means that they get to choose, and that you respect not only those who favor integration, but also those who favor separation. You don't just respect Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you also respect Malcolm X and Minister Farrakhan. If people want separation, you recognize their right to advocate and want separation. That's what that means. Self-determination means that they get to determine it. Self-determination means they determine it, not you. Right? So if black people want to separate, if Native Americans want to separate, if Chicanos want to separate, I'm for it. But I'm not going to go around forcing it on them and advocating it for them. I'm going to support their right to self-determination as historically colonized people. That's the point. And that's an important question. What can we learn from Hannah Arendt after criticizing her anti-populism? Well, one of the great things that Hannah Arendt did is she exposed Zionist collaboration with the Nazis. She wrote a whole book about it, and she made the Zionists very angry because she exposed that the Zionists, the anti-communist wing of the Jewish community that was very opposed to Marxism, in many ways celebrated Hitler coming to power because they thought he would kill all the communist Jews. And that the Zionists met with Hitler many times to try and negotiate a situation where instead of killing the Jews, Hitler would deport them all to Palestine and they could set up Israel, right? And that Hannah Arendt wrote a very, very good book exposing Zionist collaboration with the Nazis. And they hated her for that. Many of the mainstream pro-Israel commentators really hated Hannah Arendt for writing that. And I give her credit for writing that. It was a brave thing to do. She herself was Jewish. And so she had the right. If there's anybody who had the right to say that, she did. I don't like Eichmann in Jerusalem, her book. I feel it's an anti-populist book, but her work exposing Zionist Nazi collaboration is quite bold and quite admirable. And I respect her work on that front. All right. And how do you explain the abolition of private property? How do you explain the abolition of private property? Well, the way I've always understood it is that Marxists distinguish between private property and personal property. That personal property is anything you use. You know, you use your home, you use your house, your car, you use, you know, your belongings. You know, you might use a boat, you might use your personal possessions, things that you actually use for your own enjoyment. That's personal property. And Marxists seek for personal property to expand. Private property refers to the means of production. It refers to factories and banks and farmland and oil wells and stock markets, etc. Right? That personal property we want to expand. We want an expansion of personal property, and we want the abolition of private property, meaning that the means of production, the wealth-creating centers of power, that those things, the wealth-creating centers of economic power, are operated for the benefit of all society and not for profit, right? That's the abolition of capitalism. So we distinguish between personal property and private property. So there we go. All right, folks. I guess we've reached the end of our broadcast for tonight. I want to thank everyone for everything you do. I love you guys. It's been an interesting stream. I'll be back. Won't be back tomorrow, but I'll hopefully be back later this week. I'm trying to do as many streams as I can. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody.